All right, now it's time to start weaving, and this is what we call a straight twill. If you have the pattern, you know that you have treadles 1, 2, 2, 3, 3, 4, and 1, 4 tied up. The other thing, a couple other things about weaving, try not to weave too close to the beater. I know everyone's like, oh, I don't want to advance it. Well, what happens is that can affect your selvages and your tension, a whole lot of other things. So right now, I'd like to go maybe about 3 inches. So what I'm going to do is go back and forth. I'm going to go 4 times so we can see the pattern. And then I'm going to advance my loom. Now, I want you to take notice that every time I do this, we have sets of pairs that are lifted. And we don't catch the selvage every single time. This time the twill works. Sometimes it doesn't, depending on how you're threading it. And we may have that issue down the road when we do some of the other patterns, and we'll talk about it then. Right now, I'm going to advance it again. And we're going to keep on going with that same pattern. I'm trying to get my hand out of the way so you can actually see what's going on. And you can see we're getting a diagonal line. Whoops, I just went on the wrong treadle down there. One more. Now, 2 things could be happening right now. We're using more yarn in the weft right now than we were down here because we're going over sets of yarn. The other thing that could also happen, the width could be even narrower because of the pattern. 4.5. Well, actually, this time it's even a little bit wider. Sometimes it ends up being narrower, sometimes wider. In this case, because this is heavy yarn, it's a little bit wider in this case here, but you're going to need more yarn as you're weaving here, just because it's all condensing here. It's not spreading out like it was in the tabby weave. So what we're going to do is, rather than count how many times, we're going to keep weaving again until we get to about 5.5. Then what I do is I do 3 shots of the tabby. I want to make sure that, since I'm right-handed, I like to end up on the right side. So whatever you do to get it on the side that you need. If you need to do an extra one, just go ahead and do that. So I'll be weaving until I get to 5.5 inches because I know it's going to shrink this way when it comes off the loom, and it's going to shrink this direction. It shrinks both ways. Of course, when I measure, I'll do it when it's not under tension to get a more accurate reading. The other thing you'll find out is when you take it off the loom, we'll measure it again. They'll probably be a little bit shorter. And again, when we're finished, perhaps our coasters aren't exactly square, but they'll be close enough. And remember, this is your first project that you're doing on a loom, and it's a practice. It's kind of a sampler, but instead of just weaving away and having a sample, we're getting coasters. The other thing, if you want to, you can weave maybe 4 coasters or 6 coasters, whatever you want, and then just start playing around and see what happens with different colors. Before I weave any farther, let's talk a little bit about PPI, or picks per inch. What in the world is that all about? Well, we have ends per inch going through the warp, but we also have picks per inch. That's each time you go back and forth in the weft. Well, let's just see how many I happen to have. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. So in this case, I have 11. Let's count it again. Actually, I'm going to start down here and see if it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, almost 12. So I'm almost using 12 back and forth. If you're trying to calculate how much yarn do I need in the weft, sometimes people measure that, then they multiply it, and then you measure the width, which let's say let's just pretend it's 5, and it was 10. 5 times 10 would be 50 inches. So to read 1 inch, I would need 50 inches of yarn. Of course, we often translate that into yardage, so you could calculate that. And then, of course, if you're weaving something 5 inches, then you would do the multiplication and find out how much you need. Let's see how much, I'm going to use how many I've done on this one. Now, this is a little harder to count, but we'll see what we can do here. We have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, almost 20 threads back and forth. That's how many picks per inch that I have on this. Now you might be wondering, why isn't this more balanced? Why isn't this more of, if this is 8, why isn't it 8? Why is it more? The reason is that this yarn, I have it set at 8 ends per inch. If I wanted it to be a little tighter or maybe more balanced, I would use a 10 dent reed and it would be a little closer. But since it's the first project, it's a lot nicer to get something on the loom sooner than later. If I wanted to, perhaps the next time I did this pattern, instead of doing 8 ends per inch, I would pick a reed, or I would find a reed chart to figure out how to do it, that was 10 dents per inch, and then I would multiply 10 times 6 inches, and of course it would be 60. Then this all would be a little bit closer together, and I would have more of it, what they call a balanced weave. That would mean warp and weft would be closer to the same. However, the twill would still be a little bit more because you're using more yarn per inch because of the pattern. And that's why sometimes it's hard to calculate exactly what you may or may not need in your weaving. The other thing too, this will shrink up more, 8 ends per inch. If this was set tighter at 10, my whole coaster would not shrink as much. Oh no, I ran out of thread. Sometimes the end is torn and sometimes it's not. If you're using some thick yarn like this, we're going to do a little overlay. So I'm going to kind of unravel that a little bit. In this case, the other end I did tear, so the ends are all different lengths. The reason I do that is when I tuck this in, because I'm going to go and overlap this, and if they're kind of different ends, maybe they'll be less noticeable. Now, if you notice, I have it overlapped about that, but what's going to happen is it's going to all kind of smush in together. Now, this time I happen to be at the end and ready to do the hem stitching. So I guess you could say lucky for me on that situation. I'm going to cut this off, and like I said, I'm ready to do the hem stitching on the other end of this coaster. And you see I've already hem stitched, started the pattern. And this pattern is kind of a twill that you go back and forth. I just did 4, and I'm going to go backwards to 3. A little long there. 3. And then I'm on treadle 2 and back to 1. And what happens, this is like the twill I just did, or similar, however, it makes a zigzag. And again, hopefully you can see that each time that I press the treadle, 2 threads come up. Now this is another pattern that I'm weaving for these coasters. I started the next pattern. I haven't done the hem stitching yet, but I will. I wanted to show you something. This pattern, the plan is to treadle 1, which is one of the tabbies, and then I go to the twill and go back to the other tabby. Now, if you take notice here, on this side, it looks like we're catching almost every time, but over here, we're not. Now, this is where you have a decision. You can just go ahead, keep that as it is, Or perhaps if you start on a different treadle, maybe that won't be a problem. That's one of the reasons why people, when they're doing twill patterns, they'll often use a floating selvage on the end because it doesn't always catch. So I'm going to take this out and I'm going to start on a different treadle, and we'll see if it makes any difference or not. Well, I decided to start on number 2, the treadle 2, rather than on 1. And what happened is it's still not catching all the time, but it looks like it's catching kind of consistently on both sides. So I'm going to go ahead with it. Just want to see where I was the last time. Okay, I was there. Now again, I'm starting with 1. But what I literally did to start the pattern, I started on number 2 when I started it. So we're going to go see what happens. All right, so you can see there's some spacing here. This one will also go around, so it's fairly even. I'm going to live with it for now, and that's one way to take care of an issue when you have the weft thread not necessarily catching on every single one. This is not a wearable. It's going to be something that's washed. It's going to shrink up. It's going to go on the table, and it'll be fine. I just finished this pattern, and you can see how it looks on this side. I'm going to lift it up. It's kind of hard to see the other side. And you can see what happened to the selvages. They look fine to me. Yes, it didn't catch every single time. That happens with certain patterns, and you can make a decision if this works for you or not. I just finished all 4 of the coasters that are in a pattern that I designed. I have plenty more to keep on going. You could repeat them with different colors, or maybe just play around with the treadling. Sometimes it's just fun to experiment, see what happens. That's the end of the coaster recordings for now. I'll show the results after they're off the loom and also after they're washed and dried.